Welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. We've got a great live Q&A for you today. So if you've got questions pertaining to autoimmune problems and nutrition, this is the time to ask those questions, and I'll do my best to get as many answered as possible. Those of you who missed Tuesday's show, I'd also encourage you to go back and watch that show on the cure for autoimmune disease. We went really in depth. And there are two more parts to that show as well. So there's parts 1, 2, and 3. And if you haven't seen all 3 parts, I know it's a lot to watch, but if you're struggling with autoimmune problems, it's well worth your time, and it very well could save your life. So get over there and watch those if you haven't already. Now, let's dive into your questions. Let's see here. My friend told me that you never need to take more than 100% of the RDA of any vitamin or mineral. Is that true? No, your friend is wrong. The RDA was designed and developed as a tool to help people understand the minimum requirement of a nutrient to prevent overt disease states. So for example, the RDA requirement for vitamin C is the number or the amount of vitamin C that is designed to prevent full-blown scurvy. And same thing with like vitamin B1, vitamin B3 with pellagra and beriberi. So RDA is like the minimum amount to prevent full-blown disease. But disease doesn't just start overnight. You can have consistently low enough levels that your bodily functions are not being optimized nutritionally. And so things will start to break down faster than you're capable of healing, maintaining, or repairing them. And this is when dysfunction sets in. And dysfunction is really, when we say dysfunction, that's what doctors call disease, right? It's when things start to break down because you don't have the internal biochemistry for them to work properly or heal properly. And the RDA is the bare minimum. It's like, I don't know if you remember when you were a teenager and you went to go put $2 of gas in your car because you needed to get to work and home, but you didn't fill your car up. Like, you don't want to take the RDA where your body is trying to run on fumes on a daily basis. So RDA is not something that, it's a guideline for people to absolutely not go lower than, but it's certainly not an optimization number that you should be paying attention to. And a lot of doctors will say nonsense like, oh, you're just going to have expensive urine. Look, my opinion of most doctors is that they're not qualified to talk about nutrition, right? It's because they didn't study it. So just because they have a medical degree doesn't qualify them to be an expert in nutrition. The average medical expert studies nutrition at less than 7 hours in their entire 8 to 9 years of medical school. Less than 7 hours of nutrition is actually part of the curriculum. And generally speaking, and I know this because I train a lot of doctors, it's the 7 hours of nutritional training they do get is anti-nutritional training, not actual nutritional training. It's like, nutrition's not important, prescribe your patients drugs, end of class. So again, if you've got doctors telling you you're going to have expensive urine, it's because they don't understand nutrition, and you probably ought to get somebody on your corner or in your team, if you're confused, who's an expert in nutrition, and not somebody that just has carte blanche to say anything they want about health, regardless of whether or not they've been trained in it. Let's see here. So question, is it hard to get organic grass-fed bones? I stopped eating bone broth because of that. I always made my own. Oh no, not so much a question as much as a comment. I have skin immune problems after my mom passed away a week ago. I stopped prednisolone. When can I do 24 to 48 hour fasting, and do I need to gain weight first since I lost 30? Well, that's a really unique and specific question, Aliana. I would say anybody can benefit from fasting if you can tolerate it. There's no problem with making an attempt at under 3 days. If you're not working with an expert, you can run into problems if you're under 3 days. Go back up just a little bit on that YouTube side. But you can certainly fast. Now, the problem that you're going to run into is if you're underweight and you're trying to do fasting, true fasting, which is caloric restriction, so you're reducing your calories, you might lose more weight. But if you're only doing 1 or 2 days, it's probably not going to be a game changer for you. But if you're trying to do repetitive 2-day fasting multiple times over the course of a month and you're underweight, it might not be the best solution for you because you're going to lose more weight. And one of the byproducts of being undernourished is being malnourished, right? When you don't eat enough total calories, generally people also tend not to get enough protein, vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients, and so you don't necessarily want to do that. But intermittent fasting, which is a different methodology, is perfectly fine. Remember, intermittent fasting is not calorie restriction, it's just a restriction of timing. So you're eating all of your meals in a certain window during the course of your day, but you're not necessarily restricting the total amount of food that you eat from day to day. Let's see here. Go back up a little. Is that what we have on the very top? What do we have? Anything above that? No, I can't see that. I can't see that one. Okay, yeah, we'll go down. What can I do to combat psoriatic arthritis? Mother had it, multiple infections throughout my life, and was on antibiotics. Had asthma, chronic bronchitis until I went gluten-free and my acne cleared. Fantastic. And energy came back. What supplements could be beneficial? I eat healthy. So you just generalize supplements, right, Cynthia? I think is your question. It's a tough one, but I would say you can focus on 2 that have the potential to be extremely helpful. Number 1 would be a good quality multivitamin, something like Ultra Nutrients, which you can pick up at Gluten-Free Society. The other being a high quality omega-3 that has an equal amount of EPA and DHA in it. And so we have a product called Ultra Omega that I would suggest in that regard for just good overall nutritional support. Remember, you need those omega-3s to help regulate inflammation, so very, very important if you have pre-existing autoimmune arthritis. And some research studies show that higher doses of omega-3 fish oils actually have pain reduction and inflammatory reduction effects on psoriatic arthritis, among other types of autoimmune arthritis. That being said, probably the best thing, if you're just trying to figure out what can you take, there's a lot of things that might be beneficial. Certainly eating whole, real foods is going to be where the bulk of your nutrition should come from. But I would encourage you to test. We offer intracellular nutrition analysis now. I know we've been talking about that for a really long time, but it's now available direct to you. If you go to Gluten-Free Society, you can check out that lab testing, and you can get exactly a breakdown of which deficiencies you have, so that you have a good understanding of what supplements will help support your nutrition overall, beyond just the generic or generalized guessing. Even though I'm not ingesting corn starch from shampoo and conditioner products. So what you're saying, Tundra, is that you're using products that have corn starch in them, and you're not eating those products, and you're not having a skin reaction as a result of using them. Should you be concerned? I would say I would be. I don't use products that contain corn directly. Corn starch being an example of that. Look, you might have a cut on your skin, and so again, when the skin barrier is breached, it's possible right now you're not really reacting because your skin is healthy and there's no cuts or scrapes or anything like that. But once something like that happens, if you're using that kind of product, you run the risk of getting it into your bloodstream. So generally, as a barrier, skin is pretty strong and pretty resilient and can keep most things out. But there could be situations where that's not true. And there are also situations in terms of shampoo where people washing their hair and the water comes down around their mouth, and so they're getting exposure. Even if it's minuscule exposure, they're getting exposure and they're ingesting it, not intentionally but unintentionally. So the other thing you have to keep in mind is that when you're in the shower and it's a hot shower and you aerosolize those liquids, and you're turning them into steam, and then you're breathing them into your lungs, and so they can also make it into your body in that way, potentially. So those are just things to be cautious about. I do not recommend that people with gluten issues consume or utilize even the non-edible corn-based products for that reason. I take 50,000 I use a vitamin D weekly. I develop kidney and bladder stones. I'm in or at twice a year for removal. Will using Spurty vitamin D lamp get my levels up? Maybe. If you're taking 50,000 weekly, that's not enough if you have low vitamin D, Mary Ellen. For most people, I can't comment exactly because I don't know what your levels are. But if your vitamin D levels, your 25-OHD levels are below 20, even really if they're below 40, you're not going to push them into that 50 plus range with any less, most people with any less than 8,000 units a day. So if you're taking 50,000 units a week, 8,000 units a day, is 56,000. So you're 6,000 under what we would typically see to be effective at actually elevating levels that are low to elevate to levels that are above 50. So you might consider using more. 50,000 a week, once a week, is not the best way to take it either. It's best to take, 8,000 or so a day so that you get consistent dosing, because if you have any kind of malabsorption issues, and this can be true of those 50,000 IU capsules, they're generally not emulsified, so that vitamin D that's not emulsified is less readily absorbable. Remember, vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, and if you have a gluten issue and you have fat malabsorption issues and you're taking that capsule, it may not be as well absorbed as, say, an emulsified type of vitamin D that you take daily. So we have a product that is a liquid. It's called Liquid D3. One drop is 1,000 units. So if you took 8 drops a day consistently over time, have your doctor monitor your levels. And if your levels are improving and coming up, you'll have an answer. But again, generally speaking, to get a vitamin D level that's super low up, 8 to 10,000 units a day for an adult is generally what it takes, especially if you have pre-existing inflammation, because vitamin D, you're going to burn through more vitamin D. Your body uses vitamin D to help modulate the immune system's reaction to inflammation, so you use up more vitamin D when you're chronically inflamed. So you mentioned that you had a spinal cord injury, and that, I would imagine, is part of what's putting more demand on, potentially, on your vitamin D status. As I mentioned a moment ago, you might also consider doing additional nutrient testing, because there may be some other factors involved. They could be very helpful. And then if you're having recurring kidney stones and bladder stones, you also might want to look at a low oxalate diet. If you want to know more about low oxalates, I did an entire show on oxalates, and you can check out that crash course on our channel. Let's see, I have Graves' disease, found Klebsiella oxytosa in stool. Could the Klebsiella oxytosa be the cause of my Graves' disease? It could certainly be a contributing factor. Klebsiella produces different types of chemical compounds that can create what's called a molecular mimicry or a crossover reaction, and that can contribute to autoimmunity, not just Graves' disease. There are many autoimmune disease associations with Klebsiella, gram-negative Klebsiella bacteria. So it's very possible that it could be contributing to it. Time and addressing the Klebsiella and time are going to give you that answer specifically. Hopefully that's helpful. Let's see, I did an oat test and had 1 of 3 oxalate metabolite markers come back high. Does this mean I'm oxalate reactor? Levels of oxalic acid. It means there's a strong potential, Tammy. The oat test is a urine test, and urine tests for oxalate can be helpful. But you could have, I've seen cases where people had normal urine oxalate, but still had problem with oxalate. I would say, based on your results, you probably do have a problem with oxalate. It's certainly worthwhile going low oxalate, something along the lines of cutting out the major oxalate containing foods like spinach, almonds, etc. Again, you can check out our oxalate class, go into a much deeper dive on that particular topic. But oxalates can drive, I've seen cases, a number of cases where oxalates were a driving factor behind somebody's autoimmune process. And so that may be something that, again, could be very helpful for you to assess and address. Let's go down, scroll down. Oh, stop, go back. Here we go. I'm reading medical papers on Graves' disease and artemisinin. Thinking about taking, are there any warnings? I think you would just don't want to take it indefinitely. It's that particular compound can be very effective. It's actually an antiparasitic, and this is one of the reasons why there's a correlation between that and Graves. Is that Graves, one of the potential triggers for Graves can be parasite, and so that being a very potent anti-parasite herbal could potentially be very helpful. If you've got some and you want to try it, I would just say don't take it indefinitely. That would be the biggest thing, because again, it's not just a natural antiparasitic, but it's also a natural antibiotic, and so there is some potential that it could create dysbiosis in your GI tract if you take too much of a dose for too long a period of time. Let's see, go down more, and that on the right. So Larry says, those of us who thrive and choose primal handle quality dairy well. I do a September Whole30 each year. Do you feel it's good to reset with dairy and in general vary foods to maintain tolerance? I think it's very unique and individual to the person. I mean, there's so many people, for example, that are allergic to dairy. And so for those people, no, even being primal, even being relatively healthy, if you're allergic to dairy, I certainly don't recommend that you try to increase the consumption of it. Even higher quality dairy, like grass-fed A2 dairy products. No, I don't know if that answers your question, but the best way, in my opinion, the best way to alter diet, if we're talking about preventing or regaining tolerance to different foods, is to try to eat as much as you can locally, organically, and seasonally. Eat what's in season, eat what's local, and certainly organic. And if it doesn't have the organic sticker, I mean, you can find organically grown foods that don't have the organic sticker if you have a relationship with local co-ops or local farmers. So that's generally the best generic advice I would give in terms of diet modification around that. But you got to remember, you got to be careful with dairy, regardless if you have a history of gluten sensitivity, because a lot of people with gluten will react to the dairy for several different reasons, and one of them has to do with molecular mimicry. Gluten and casein can look very similar, and then there are other issues long-term, especially somebody who's had a really long history of gluten intolerance, where they've potentially damaged permanently some of the areas of the small intestine where the enzyme that breaks lactose down, lactase, is produced. So you can have a lactose intolerance. I'm not saying you do, but many people do, that have a long history of gluten-induced intestinal damage. And so they just have become intolerant to the dairy, mainly because they're not producing the digestive enzyme to break down the sugars in dairy. Let's go down in the middle. No, nothing more there. Okay, let's go down on the right, in the bottom there. Why can some people, oh, sorry, missed it. Why can some people handle eating wheat in a place like Italy when they can't in the US? There's a variety of reasons. One reason would be that, and this is not necessarily 100% true. I know that in Europe now, a lot of glyphosate products are creeping in across the pond. And so we're seeing more and more people react. And look, I see people fly in from overseas to my practice all the time. So I see tons of sick people from Europe eating European grains and still getting sick. So I think part of it depends on whether or not you're truly gluten sensitive. Some people aren't gluten sensitive. They react to the grain in this country because they're being poisoned by glyphosate and they're highly reactive to it. And most grains today, they're double sprayed before harvest. And so a lot of people are reacting to the glyphosate, or other herbicides or pesticides. Now that's one possibility. Another possibility that people might react to grain when they're not gluten sensitive is mold toxins. A lot of grains are contaminated with the toxins that mold produces. So aspergillus and penicillium molds will produce different types of toxins like ochratoxin A and gliotoxin, and those and aflatoxin, and those can be found heavily in grain-based products. And so some people are reacting to that. And so part of it depends on how the grain is grown, how it's farmed, whether that's pesticide being used, and also the genetic hybridization of the grain, because some grains are now being grown where they actually contain more gluten than some of the traditional grains. And so there's all kinds of different possibilities as far as why somebody could maybe not react as much when they go to Europe or react at all when they go to Europe. And then there's also, the other thing that I see very frequently is the holiday high. And so if you're over on a vacation, on a trip, one of the things that happens is generally you're away from work, there's a lot less stress, you've got endorphin and dopamine highs because you're on a vacation, and those things act as natural anti-inflammatories and natural pain relievers, and so they can mask some of the things that you might experience when you're not on that holiday. And so I see that a lot where people go on vacation and they feel better. Even when they're traveling in the US, I see that, where they go on vacation and feel better because of that holiday high. So that's just something else to consider. But remember, not everyone's gluten sensitive. I think a lot of people try to make the argument that no one should ever eat grains ever, no matter what the case is. And I don't think we could scientifically have that we have the data to back up that statement. But we do have a lot of other problems in grain beyond gluten, and some of those problems are more pervasive in the U.S. than they are in Europe. I've read that vitamin C depletes copper. Your thoughts? No, I would say vitamin C doesn't necessarily deplete copper. Now they are utilized together where they are very important as kind of co-partners, Sally, is in the production of the cross-links for collagen. So as your body is trying to make stretchy, elastic collagen fibers, their collagen is like it's a tripeptide, but it looks like a triple helix. So it's like a rope. If you've ever seen a rope, we have three smaller ropes intertwined around each other. That would be what collagen looks like. And in between each strand, there are these cross-links, like ladder rung fibers. Those are made out of vitamin C and copper. And so when you take a lot of vitamin C, it's beneficial to have copper there too because of that functionality, but it's not necessarily that vitamin C causes a copper deficiency. Oh, thanks, Larry. Larry says, thanks for giving so much of your time to humanity on social media. It's awesome. Thank you. Well, I'm super excited that that you value it. And I mean, I love being around people that value what I do and value what I can bring to the table. So I appreciate your sentiment. Does white willow affect platelets like NSAIDs do? Yeah, white willow can. It can thin your blood. So if you're going to try to use white willow on any kind of regular basis for anti-inflammation, and you already are on like a platelet medication or you're on a blood thinner, you do want to be cautious about that. And if you start finding yourself bruising super easy or having blood pooling under your skin, you want to maybe talk to your doctor about other options. My brother has type 2 diabetes and recently had his appendix out. The surgeon told him it was totally black. He was told that we really don't need the appendix. That's what they said about tonsils. That's what they say about the gallbladder. That's what they say to a lot of women about their ovaries and their uterus. Look, surgeons make their living pulling out organs, right? Not all, but typically. And so it's a common thing that they'll say, you don't need the organ. I disagree. Now, if you've got acute appendicitis and it's threatening your life and you're going to go septic if you don't have it removed, get it out. It might save your life to do that. Anyway, beyond that, though, what is the role of the appendix and what are some diet and lifestyle changes to make? Any other suggestions? The role of the appendix, as far as we know, we're not 100% sure. It's one of the reasons why a lot of doctors say it's perfectly fine to remove it is because there's no agreed upon scientific consensus about the role of the organ, which again, just because we don't know, I mean, a lack of knowledge does not iterate that the organ is not important. We say the same thing about the spleen. The functionality of the spleen is not tremendously well understood. It doesn't make the organ unimportant. There's a reason it's there. So, but what we think the appendix is it's a storehouse for bacteria. So, there are a lot of bacteria in the appendix generally speaking, that can help your microbiome, support your microbiome's populations. And so having it removed can put a person, in my experience, can put a person at a disadvantage long-term for a healthy microbiome status. Let's see here. Lyrian, how does mold affect the thyroid? Why would nodules swell after 2 weeks if entering into a moldy building? Because mold toxins, so there's two reasons, that more than two, but there's two main reasons. One would be you could be allergic to mold, and that the immune response against the mold spores themselves are basically creating enough inflammation that might affect your thyroid. The other would be that you're being poisoned by the mycotoxins themselves. And mycotoxins are notorious for creating tissue damage and inflammation, and certainly the thyroid is not. It's not immune to that potential effect. Can gluten sensitivity ever be reversed when nutrition is improved and nutraceuticals are taken over time? Gluten sensitivity, I would say no. If you've been genetically identified as gluten sensitive, you're not going to reverse that, because if you have the genetic predisposition to react to gluten, the way you activate the genes is by not eating gluten. And so, you know, the way you reactivate it is to eat gluten. So, you know, a lot of times people go gluten-free, they start feeling better, they're recovering their health, and then they want to try to make an attempt at bringing gluten back into the diet. And lo and behold, if they do it long enough, and sometimes they don't take much at all, they have an acute flare, but sometimes they'll bring it back in, and over a period of a month, 2-3 months, they'll start feeling slowly worse, and they'll be back where they were when they started their diet change journey. But you can't reverse gluten sensitivity of a genetic nature. Now, there are things that can mimic or emulate gluten reactions, or that can accelerate gluten reactions. And one of the interesting things, I'm going to be talking about this on Tuesday night for those of you interested, because we've got a lot on the disease that shall not be named coming back into the picture, and everybody's kind of starting to panic and freak out a little bit. But, you know, for example, we know that spike proteins, there's a huge group of scientists and GI doctors that believe we're going to see a massive increase in gluten exposure reactions because of the spike protein. There are some super similarities between what that does to the immune system and what gluten does to the immune system. So, you know, we've identified that spike as a gluten accelerant, meaning it accelerates the level of reactions that people can have toward gluten. We see the same thing in certain blood pressure medications. We see the same thing with a number of other medications that people are commonly prescribed, like steroids. We can see it a lot of times with coffee. Coffee can be a gluten accelerant. Alcohol, absolutely a gluten accelerant. B vitamin deficiencies like vitamin B3, which can also cause villus atrophy and accelerate a reaction to gluten through the destruction of the GI tract. So there are a lot of things that, you know, a person may or may not be gluten sensitive, but may have some of these other things going on, and find that a gluten-free diet is helpful for them because of those other things, and not necessarily because they're gluten sensitive. But then there are people that are gluten sensitive genetically, have the predisposition, and so those are the individuals. You're not going to get their gluten sensitivity genetics to change. There's no way we can manipulate genes in a human at this point, although that may change down the road. It's not anything we can do about today. Let's see here. I am deeply researching vagus nerve because I believe I have some issues. Secondly, how does that tie into autoimmune, and can it lead to various different diseases or dysfunction of several different body functions? I've noticed serious muscle loss and rapid skin aging, which I'm beginning to tie with poor vagal tone. Look, the vagus nerve is a cranial nerve. It's cranial nerve number 10. I mean, and it's one of its primary roles is in mitigating the functionality of your parasympathetic nervous system. And if you, again, very oversimplified explanation here, but the parasympathetic nervous system is this aspect of our nervous system that controls our sleep, our quality of sleep, our digestion, our capacity to heal and restore and repair. And so if you are parasympathetic dominant, meaning I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. If you're sympathetic dominant, meaning the other aspect of your immune system called the fight or flight nervous system is always turned on, in your sympathetic dominant in a fight or flight mode, they work like antagonists to each other. So if your sympathetic is high, your parasympathetic is usually going to be suppressed. And remember, vagus nerve is parasympathetic. And then you have the sympathetic system over here. Well, what drives the sympathetic nervous system to go into overtime? You've got food allergies, food sensitivities, environmental stressors. This could be behaviors, this could be relationship stressors or work stressors. This could be lack of sleep. This could be overabundance of, too much physical activity can put you in that state. I mean, there's a number of different things that can drive a person into sympathetic dominance. 4 categorical chemical triggers of sympathetic dominance would be the wrong food, the wrong chemical exposures, microbial imbalances, and nutritional deficits. So those 4 categories are things that can drive a person into a chronic state of fight or flight where they're chronically stressed chemically all the time, and so their parasympathetic nervous system is being suppressed. Because when the body sees danger, its natural response is to escape or get away from danger. Its natural response is not to digest food really well or go to sleep or relax. And so what happens is the body stays in a fight or flight mode to try to warn the person who's going through the stressors to escape the stressors or get away from them. It's just that most people aren't super in tune with their bodies, so they ignore the message and then they medicate it. If you're super stressed or anxious, what do people do? They go get benzodiazepines or other drugs from the doctor to suppress the symptoms of sympathetic dominance, and so they never really get better, and then they put themselves in a state where they can't heal. So how do you reverse that? Well, you find out what your triggers are, number one, and deal with them. You also practice, and this is going to sound a little silly, but practice mindfulness in the moment. When people have sympathetic dominance, they're generally in fear or anxiety, thinking either about the future that hasn't come to pass yet, or they're thinking about the past, but they're not living in the moments. And so when you live in the past or the future, you can never materialize anything great in your present. Because your mind is always somewhere else. And so bringing your mind back to the present moment, and then a lot of people accomplish this through counseling, through meditation. There's another really great therapy that the Japanese use called forest bathing, because there are a number of different chemicals when you naturally walk through a forest that are calmative, that are helping to stimulate vagus tone. And there's float tanks, which are another really nice therapy. Some people get massages. Some people schedule and take vacations more regularly, or take time off of work, or whatever that looks like in your life. Everybody's stressors are going to be uniquely their own, but you have to find balance in life. And so many people, especially in the U.S. culture, are super imbalanced in so many things that they do, that they don't have that vagal tone to turn on their parasympathetic nervous system to any great degree, and so they start to struggle and suffer. And so it's very common to see digestion fail first. So constipation is a commonality there, as well as sleep disturbance. And so when you don't poop and you don't sleep, you're basically your body's being clogged with poop as poison, and then you're not recovering and restoring and getting deep restorative sleep, and so your body slowly just deteriorates at a more aggressive speed. And that's where a lot of chronic illness comes from. Anyway, I hope that's helpful for you. Let's see, Bonnie says, can you share anything about Epstein-Barr virus altering the binding of vitamin D at receptor sites? Not really. Look, I'm not a fan. I know a lot of people are out there blaming Epstein-Barr, but I really don't believe Epstein-Barr is a major culprit for most people. I've seen, for 22 years, I have seen so many people come to me with these positive Epstein-Barr tests from their other doctors. And not a single case ever have I seen where a person couldn't get better even though they had positive Epstein-Barr antibodies. In other words, when we addressed the underlying core issues, the Epstein-Barr issue became irrelevant. It was, in the cases I've seen, it's a guilt by association, meaning that a lot of times the doctor blames Epstein-Barr and then tries to treat the Epstein-Barr, and then patients don't get better because it's a guilt by association and not an actual confirmation that Epstein-Barr is driving any kind of illness forward. There are many experts in virology that believe that Epstein-Barr and mono and herpes-like viruses are actually will manifest when a person's sick. They won't cause the person to become sick. They will simply just manifest when a person is sick. And so that's where that guilt by association can really step in and can confuse a lot of people about the true underlying reason as to why they're struggling. What should I take before and after radiation exposure from an upcoming mammogram? I mean, you can certainly take iodine, extra iodine, 12.5 to 25 milligrams a day for a week before and after. Wouldn't be a bad idea. Look, I mean, I would go one step deeper with that question. I mean, I can't tell you what to do, Jessica. That you have to figure out on your own. But I could tell you, if you were my wife, I could just tell you the way I would counsel my wife. If my wife were being told she needed a mammogram, I would absolutely, adamantly oppose it for many reasons. Maybe we have a whole show in us to talk about mammograms in that way, but one of the biggest reasons is you don't look for cancer by poisoning the patient. I mean, there are other ways to detect breast cancer beyond the mammogram. There's thermography that's non-invasive. There's additionally, there is self-breast examination, which is a far more accurate tool, in my opinion, because women know their bodies, especially if you do this on a semi-regular basis. So I would encourage you to explore other things outside of a mammogram. Question whether or not it's something you actually want to do, because you're going to radiate yourself. And a lot of times mammograms come back false positive. So now you're in this limbo period for 2 or 3 months, anxiety out of your mind because you don't know whether or not, the result is negative or positive. And now they want to start poking needles in your breasts using dyes and other things. And to me, it just escalates from there. There's a really great book. I would encourage any woman or husband of a woman where mammogram is being recommended. It's called Overdiagnosed. Overdiagnosed by, I think it's Gilbert Welch. W-E-L-C-H is the name of the author of that book. But he's a breast cancer researcher, MD, PhD. Fantastic book. It'll shed a ton of light on why the flaws in the whole diagnostic process behind breast cancer in women. And so I think any woman who's trying to maintain and keep good health should obligate themselves to read that book so that they have informed consent, better knowledge base to be able to make the decision as to whether or not doing a mammogram is something they want to do. So coming back around to the copper, vitamin C question, Sal, if you use Detox C, there's copper in it. It's mineralized and buffered with copper and zinc and some other minerals. So if you use that, you're fine. You don't need to take an additional higher dose copper supplement. How can you know if your thyroid is damaged beyond repair? I hear about people healing from Hashis. I would say this, that, the only time I would say your thyroid is going to be damaged beyond repair, that we could definitively say it's damaged beyond repair, is if you've had it radioactively destroyed or surgically removed. Anything else is like a cut. Your body can heal it if you get out of the way. If you figure out what caused the damage and you change your diet and lifestyle, your body is capable of healing so many things. So if you still have the organ itself and you haven't poisoned it away or surgically removed it, in my opinion, it's never too late. Is melatonin blood test from Quest intracellular? No, it's not. Shannon is asking, do we deal with Lyme and mold toxicity? And the answer is yes, on a pretty regular basis. More mold than Lyme, just because I think because of my geographic location. We're down in Texas, where Lyme is much less common than, say, in the Northeast. How do you know which vitamin C to buy? There's a lot of questions about vitamin C today. Detox C, if you want my very biased opinion, but Detox C, it's my own formulation. That's why I'm biased. Most vitamin Cs are corn, GMO corn. And ours is not. It's a wild African organic potato derivative. And so it's very safe to take, especially for those of you that are gluten sensitive. And the other reason why I like it is because we've buffered it so that it's less acidic to the stomach, or less apt to create kind of an overacidic response. That's important because some people have pre-existing ulcers or pre-existing GI damage, and vitamin C can irritate that damage. It doesn't cause it, but it can irritate pre-existing damage. And so when you buffer it, that reduces the capacity or the potential for that to happen. Do autoimmune diseases go into remission, or can you get rid of them 100% after you heal? In my experience, yes. Now, like, you know, a lot of doctors are going to tell you there's no cure. A lot of doctors are going to tell you you can't heal them, you can't get rid of them. They're going to tell you they're lifelong diagnosis. But then out of the same breath, they're going to tell you we don't know what causes it. And my question to that has always been, if you don't know what caused it, then how can you know it's permanent? If you don't know enough, how can you know everything, right? Either you know or you don't know. But to doom somebody to the thought that the disease is incurable and unstoppable, in my opinion, is a mistake, because it sets up the wrong psychology for healing. And what I've found over the last several decades is that a person has to have the right mindset to heal well. And so if they have a fatalistic attitude about their illness, that it will never go away, or that it can't ever go away, or that the body's incapable of healing, then it won't heal. If you have the right mindset, that's where it starts. It starts in the mind. Now, in my experience, have I seen autoimmune disease go into remission and completely go away? Yeah, thousands of times. So in my opinion, it's curable. Although, you know, there are plenty of people that would argue with that statement. So, you know, I think autoimmune disease can go away. I don't just think it. I've seen it countless times. And so I would encourage you to explore that in a little bit more depth, especially if you've been told that it won't go away or it can't go away. So somebody's asking about, I was searching for the HLA-DQ alpha and beta-1 genetic test with ChatGPT, and it says there's no such genetic test for NCGS. What's the reason it says this? Look, ChatGPT is not somebody you want to have a conversation with. ChatGPT is accumulating information that it garners from online, and most ChatGPT models are the newest. They can only go as high as 2021, but I've caught ChatGPT lying several times. We've played a lot with ChatGPT as a technology just to see what it's capable of and not capable of doing. And one of the things ChatGPT regularly lies to me about is medical references. When I ask it medical questions to give synopsis or summaries of medical questions and list your references and your resources, a lot of times ChatGPT will give me fake references. It can't, so my point is there's nothing wrong with ChatGPT. It's just not capable of answering your questions in an intelligent manner. It's a machine that is going to go and drag and select certain things that it can find, and it's going to try to piecemeal an answer together for you, and that answer is not always going to be accurate. So I don't really recommend that you use that as a gold standard to have a conversation about how you can improve your health. Can one eat sprouts? What sprouts? So yeah, I mean, a person can eat sprouts, but I don't recommend grain-based sprouts. But sprouts being just the little stem and leaf that grow generally from a number of different variety of different kinds of seed-based foods are generally pretty fine as far as consumption in the diet. Can autoimmune disease cause low magnesium levels? Can high doses of magnesium cause lower systolic blood pressure? So yes to both questions. Autoimmune disease, the inflammation levels in autoimmune disease can drive up the demand on magnesium, causing magnesium depletion and thus leading to deficiency. Some people, when taking magnesium, it's a natural muscle relaxer, and that includes the heart and the blood vessels. It can lower their blood pressure, and in some cases can lower it too much. Although that's pretty uncommon, it can happen. But the best way to lower your systolic blood pressure is muscle tone, is exercise, muscle tone, vascular tone. So doing things that promote good vascular tone is far more effective at lowering systolic blood pressure over time than anything else. What causes extreme bloating after eating, even drinking water? Usually bacterial imbalance in the GI tract it's one of the biggest causes. When people are bloated every time they eat, no matter what they eat, it's typically certain kinds of microorganisms will take that food and convert it into gases, and those gases will cause the extreme bloating and intestinal distension. Dr. Osborne, do you think rheumatic arthrosis can be considered an autoimmune disease? No, I know it's an autoimmune disease. Not do I think, but it is absolutely a fact that rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune condition. Should you take a supplement with rice hulls in it if you're gluten intolerant? No, not in my opinion. I think you should avoid rice and corn and wheat, barley, rye, oats, and the other grains. And if you're not familiar with no grain, no pain, if you're not familiar with the true gluten-free diet, I encourage you to go and read that information to get up to speed on what gluten actually is. The FDA, unfortunately, uses an antiquated definition to define gluten, and it confuses a lot of people, and it keeps a lot of people sick, in my opinion. Is postprandial somnolence an indicator of suboptimal glycemic control? Possibly. It could also be that it's postprandial inflammation, postprandial meaning after eating, that is leading to somnolence. So it might be glycemic issues, but it also might be food-induced inflammatory issue around your nervous system creating somnolence. How do you know if you have one or more autoimmune diseases? Generally, most people, they know they have an autoimmune disease, Doug, because they go to a doctor and they're diagnosed. There's some type of testing that gets performed depending on the doctor, the specialists. But there are over 100 forms of autoimmunity, and most of them are diagnosed through blood tests, antibody blood tests. Things like anti-nuclear antibodies, rheumatoid factor, Hashimoto's is diagnosed through TPO or anti-thyroid globulin antibodies. So there's just a variety of different antibody tests that can be used by your doctor to measure whether or not you have those and then confirm the diagnosis of an autoimmune response. I'm not sure I understand your question. Can we put out these seeds in melons, cantaloupe, and use it for others? Similar to pumpkin. I'm not sure what you mean by that. You have to reword that question. Heat intolerance. I've been experiencing heat intolerance. What can be the cause of this potentially? Potentially, heat intolerances oftentimes are caused by neurological dysfunction, which have a number of different possible causes or triggers. B vitamin deficiencies, autoimmune conditions affecting the nervous system's ability to regulate temperature are probably two of the more common ones. I'm hearing that autoimmune is mainly caused by leaky gut, but now hearing it can be hidden viruses. Your thoughts? I think a lot of people blaming viruses for autoimmune disease. Just my experience and my opinion, Barbara, I mean, it doesn't mean that other doctors that have seen this and have experienced something different is wrong, but it's just my experience that viruses are less likely and less common the issue. And what is more common is food and environmental triggers, but not so much viruses. Now, that's not to say that viruses can't be. It's just simply to say, in my experience, a lot of times it has more to do with food. And my thought on that is, when people eat poorly, their immune systems respond poorly. And when their immune system responds poorly, they're more susceptible to viral issues and other microbial issues. So if you change the food, you change the immune system. You change the immune system, you change the resistance, and you don't have to worry about microbes anywhere near as much when the body has the tools it needs to heal and repair. Remember, food, it provides those tools, but if food is not providing those tools and it's providing poison, and generally people become less apt to react to the environment in a strong, constitutional way. Is drinking wheat okay? No. And if you mean wheat juice or wheatgrass juice, I would also say no. Not something I would recommend if you're gluten sensitive. Do you think parasites are influential in autoimmune disease? Yes, I do. Parasites can definitely be a trigger for many people's autoimmune process. Is there a loading dose for methylfolate if you're deficient in folate? No, you don't need to do a loading dose. Generally speaking, about anywhere from 800 to 1600 micrograms a day of folate. Methylfolate is a good place to start, but you don't need to load at a particularly high dose to get levels in the right place. Curious about Dr. Osborne's regime. Can you tell us what supplements he takes daily? Yeah. I mean, I take a multivitamin, I take Ultra Nutrients, I take Ultra Omega. Those two things I take without fail every single day. And then from there, it's a variety of other things based on, I test myself regularly. So, you know, there may be times where I show up where I'm deficient for, you know, different B vitamins or different things. And so I'll take a little bit extra of those based on test results. So I'm more of an objective supplementer than I am just a, hey, I'm going to take this particular supplement. Now, when I'm training or working out a little bit more aggressively, and there are periods of the year where I go and I'll do more aggressive training with CrossFit, I'll take creatine monohydrate, I'll take branched chain amino acids and L-glutamine, and I'll take these things to help accelerate my healing and my recovery so that I'm not getting injured or injuring out or stressing, or wearing down my muscles and tendons and ligaments to such a great degree where I'm subject to proneness of injuries. But I'll do those two things without, beyond the shadow of a doubt. Again, Ultra Nutrients and Ultra Omega are two that I'm not gonna go a day without taking those. And then beyond that, it's very unique to what to what my needs are. And again, those of you that aren't aware, we do nutritional testing through Gluten Free Society now, and that's available without a doctor's order. So anybody can now do that kind of intracellular testing if you want to get really dialed in and specific about which nutrients your body needs versus trying to emulate what I do, because what I do may not be the best thing for you. Kim says, I've been on a meat-heavy carnivore keto way of eating for over a year. It reversed my type 2 diabetes, but my scalp psoriasis hasn't cleared. It's better, but still not going away. Any advice? Yeah, get some testing done, Kim. You know, scalp psoriasis, and not just scalp psoriasis, but just psoriasis in general, oftentimes can be a manifestation of yeast issues. And going carnivore and keto can really help with yeast issues, because yeast generally are fermenting microorganisms that love carbohydrate in the diet, and so they will get stronger the more carbs you eat. But it's possible that, you know, depending on how long you had diabetes, that you have some kind of semblance left of yeast overgrowth, either on your skin, like candida, or other forms of yeast on the skin that are growing, that are contributing to that, or even systemically inside your body and your bloodstream. And so you might consider some antifungals, talking with your doctor about antifungals, or getting some testing done for yeast overgrowth as a potential for why that's still happening. What mineral or supplement in the body is deficient if the person is getting swelling in the extremities, abdomen, ankles, or feet? I mean, there's a lot, Shanna. You know, one of the biggest things that can cause a lot of swelling is CoQ10 deficiency. But you know, if you're swelling in the abdomen, to me, that's a red flag. You need to get that checked out by your doctor, because severe liver damage can lead to something called ascites, which is fluid retention in the abdomen, and that can turn out to be quite dangerous. And so you'd certainly want to go have that looked at medically if you haven't already. But fluid accumulation in the extremities, you know, that can be a sign of congestive heart failure. Vitamin B1 deficiency, CoQ10, magnesium, potassium, calcium deficiencies, all potentially can play a role. There's just a long list of things because of the overlap in some of their functions around the cardiovascular flow of blood. And so when the heart's weak and not working well, then the extremities are one of the first areas where we'll start to see swelling and fluid accumulation. Positive results in people with Parkinson's disease? Yes, but it can also be tough. It depends on when a person starts to investigate. Later stages, just like with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's kind of fall in the same category of the later the stage that a person, or the longer a person lets it go, the harder it is to come back from it. And so if you have early warning signs, you need to go, you know, I'd say get with a good functional practitioner quickly. Don't wait. I see a lot of people wait. I've also seen a ton of Parkinson's damage as a result of mold exposure. And a lot of people, unfortunately, they ignore the mold piece because it's so overwhelming. You know, you ever, I've gone through it. I lost a house to mold, and it's overwhelming. right? When the one place that you are supposed to be able to go home and be safe is actually a place that's killing you. That's a hard pill to swallow, and a lot of people ignore that at their own neuronal deterioration. And so, I've seen a number of cases where Parkinson's progressed, especially in people who have moldy homes or moldy environments. Is there any way to reverse radioactive iodine pill I took in '97, or is my thyroid dead for life now and stuck on medication for what was Graves and is now hypo? I don't know. I mean, so with radioactive pills, I've seen cases where a person had residual thyroid tissue function, but whether or not that is your case, hard to say. I would say, look, treat yourself as if your thyroid isn't dead. Obviously you're going to be on medication, but approach your diet and your lifestyle in the same manner that you would approach it if you still had a thyroid and had Graves' disease. And you might see there could be some changes or improvements in your functionality. It's hard to say. You can't predict the future. But I certainly wouldn't put it past the body to make an attempt at healing. It just depends on how decimated your thyroid was with that radioactive iodine. With dysautonomia and POTS, I can't tolerate supplements as they make me feel even worse. You're probably in mold. Those of you who have a hard time taking supplements, when supplements make you feel worse, it's just my experience. The other very common reason is mold, because this is especially true of supplements that accelerate detoxification. When a person's in mold and they take a supplement like glutathione or a methylated B vitamin, what can happen is it accelerates mobilization of mycotoxins from fat, and it can increase their exposure in the bloodstream, and that can make them feel worse. So, if that's what's happening to you, I'd strongly encourage you to investigate down that realm or that thought. But if you're talking about grain-free foods to eat in order to get you the best nutrition, I mean, one of the most nutrient-dense foods, Tara, is organ meat, particularly liver. And so, liver is the giver. It contains storage of a lot of nutrients. And so if you're trying to get pound for pound one of the most nutrient-dense foods, liver would be the one that I would encourage you to consume more frequently, and see how well you tolerate that and see how well it can do for your nutrition. Opinion on gluten blocking enzymes. I think if you're eating your own food at home, you shouldn't need to take a gluten blocking enzyme. If you're going out to eat a lot, it's probably a smart thing to take one just in case you get cross-contamination, but it's certainly, some of these companies that sell some of these products, we have our version of it called Gluten Shield, but I think we market it ethically in the sense that we don't tell people, go eat all the gluten you want, just take Gluten Shield. What we tell people is, look, if you're going to eat out, there's a risk of cross-contamination. Minimize that risk and take this before you eat, but don't take it so that you can try to eat spaghetti or pizza or pasta, etc. Where some of these companies are saying, go eat all the spaghetti, pizza, and pasta you want, just take our enzyme. That, to me, is nonsense, and it's unethical as hell. But at the end of the day, if you're controlling your food and you're not eating out, you're not running a risk of cross-contamination, you really shouldn't need an enzyme that helps you break gluten down. I mean, that not necessarily as an everyday thing that you take. Can I give a detailed overview? I can give a generalized overview today. We don't have time to get into detail, but as far as how to overcome candida imbalances, I can give you just some general directions to go in, but it's very varied from person to person. But the first thing you have to do is you have to change your diet. I mean, candida loves carbohydrate. Your total carbohydrate consumption in your diet can't be higher than 33% of your total calories, or you're going to have a heck of a time getting rid of it. Secondly, you want to use different types of natural anti-fungal agents. One of my favorite is vitamin C. A lot of people don't realize that vitamin C is very antifungal. And so 5 grams a day is a really good place to start. Most people tolerate really well. You can also consider things like oregano and caprylic acid, Indian horsetail. There are a number of herbs that can be used that have known antifungal effects. You also want to consider a good strong probiotic to create competition for Candida. Remember, Candida will grow when there's no competition to suppress their growth. So good probiotics would be a great support idea in that regard. Those are, again, generalized things you can do. We actually have people follow something called a low fermentation diet, which is just a diet that prevents the overconsumption of specific types of carbohydrates that are known to feed Candida. So those things are kind of a general overview. I think that question probably deserves its own hour-long show because there's just a lot to unpack there. Is remission of a skin immune disease possible at all? Yeah, I mean, I've seen a number of cases of psoriatic skin problems, eczema go away, DH, dermatitis herpetiformis, urticaria, flares, blisters, unexplainable blisters, keratomas, other types of skin inflammatory conditions go away with diet change. One of the toughest is vitiligo. I've seen cases where people with vitiligo had repigmentation. I've also seen cases where they didn't. And so it's one of those. It's a little bit more challenging, but the others, absolutely. I've seen those immune conditions improve dramatically. We have a, if you want to see one of the most amazing stories, Aliana, we have it's a story. Her name is Shanna, and she had several different forms of autoimmune disease, and the solution from her doctors, she had something called polymyalgia, and which is basically it's a muscle autoimmune disease that impacts the muscles and causes severe pain. She was in such pain she couldn't walk up her stairs, and the solution was long-term steroid use. So her doctors just kept her on steroids to keep the inflammation at bay. And what that did is it shrunk her adrenal glands to the point where she couldn't make her own steroids, her own corticosteroids. And one of the side effects that she also had from the autoimmune disease was her skin. So her skin had inflammatory eruptions, particularly on her face. And so they also gave her steroid creams to apply to her face. And what they ended up doing was causing scalding skin syndrome, which is a very common side effect of long-term skin topical steroid use. And I mean, her face literally was swollen up to this, massive size, and it had, skin just peeling off all the time. And it was a travesty because she's such a beautiful woman and such a kind and gentle heart. But that's what they did to her until she came to me, and then we figured out what to do. One of her big issues was gluten sensitivity. She also had some mold issues, and so once we figured that out, we were able to not only keep her off the steroids, but we were able to get her face to completely heal. And now, we have a video of her, I think, on our YouTube channel that is just an amazing story. If it's something you want to watch, just to get some inspiration from. Main causes of fat malabsorption after eliminating gluten, dairy, and omega-6. There are a number of things that can cause fat malabsorption because in eliminating gluten and dairy, there could be other foods that are triggering GI tract inflammation, leading to fat malabsorption. So that's a possibility. Then there's also, is your liver and gallbladder functioning well? Do you have good function? You might consider, those of you with fat malabsorption beyond the diet change, consider an ultrasound of your liver and gallbladder to see whether or not you have fatty liver or problems in that regard, because that could also be contributing to, you need bile to absorb fat, and when the liver's not adequately producing bile and the gallbladder's not adequately ejecting bile into the small intestine, you can really struggle to absorb fat. Some people take bile acid supplementation in order to support their fat digestion, but I've also seen a lot of people, Joseph, where they're eating they're on these keto diets, and so they're just eating a tremendous amount of fat, and so they don't really have fat malabsorption. They have presumed fat malabsorption because they're just eating so much fat, more than what they're capable of breaking down and digesting. And so that's another possibility that can lead to what we call pseudo-fat malabsorption. It's not really malabsorption, it's just an overabundance of fat. I have Dupuytren's disease, and DNA said I have one gene for celiac. I've been gluten-free for 1 year and still have oily stool. What causes? I mean, that's a big question, Michelle. I mean, Dupuytren's, which is a contraction, a permanent contraction of the hand, of the tendons in the fingers, generally speaking. If you've been gluten-free for a year but not grain-free, you may be on the wrong road. This is what I was talking about earlier about the traditional gluten-free diet versus the true gluten-free diet. So if you're not familiar with my book, No Grain, No Pain, I recommend you get your hands on a copy and apply the diet format there. If that's not working, maybe you're already doing that and that's not working, then you need to get testing done, because you don't want to guess at this. Because something like Dupuytren's can progress. You can get progressive deterioration and weakness in the hands, and you don't want to get to a point where you can't open a jar at home. You know, I mean, that's not a good place to be. What's the protocol to reduce anti-gliadin antibodies to get gliadin out of the diet? That's it. There's no other protocol. You have to get the diet dialed in. My thoughts on colostrum for gut healing. I think if a person is not reactive to dairy, I think colostrum can be helpful and beneficial. We also use something called Immune Shield, which is a non-colostrum based antibody powder that is, in my opinion, just as effective as colostrum without the dairy component to it. I'm burning in my throat, which I can't relieve. It's been a year with no relief with the antacids. You got to figure out why your throat is burning. A lot of people that have burning in their throat, I mean, you could be eating other foods you're reactive to. It may not have anything to do at all with acid. Therefore, an antacid wouldn't work. It might have to do more with foods that you're eating causing immune reaction in the back of your throat, leading to the inflammation, the damage of the tissues in the throat. It could also be that you have an infection that nobody's checked out. So you should follow up with your doc and get a culture and rule that kind of thing out. But also you should get some food sensitivity testing to see, are you eating foods that are contributing to this? Are there certain spices to avoid with autoimmune disease? Not really in particular. A lot of doctors will say avoid things like echinacea or elderberry. I don't agree with those premises. It's a unique case-by-case basis when it comes to autoimmune problems, but there's not like a general thing I'd say everybody with autoimmune disease should avoid this. I mean, if I were going to make a claim like that, it wouldn't be certain spices. It would be gluten. Anyone with a pre-existing diagnosis of an autoimmune disease is a safe bet that you're gluten sensitive, and so going gluten-free, eliminating gluten-free would probably put you in a great direction. Long history of extreme fatigue, widespread muscle and joint pain, headaches, depression, anxiety, insomnia, fibromyalgia, diagnosis. Recent symptoms include this. You're in mold, Brenda, most likely. You just spouted out kind of the most common things that mold victims have in common. You need to get, what I would suggest that you do is one, find a really good forensic mold investigator to come out and look at your house. You can also get tested and talk to your doctor about it, but get tested for mycotoxins and to rule out whether or not the toxins of mold are concentrated in your body, because those things can just wreck health. And fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue diagnosis, you got to rule out mold. I see it too frequently, too often in those situations. Can ultracholine raise your blood sugar? No, I've not seen it do that. So it's not something I would suspect really at all. Deborah says, I have half a thyroid after the left gland was removed with a cold, non-functional nodule attached. This was 4 months postpartum, and since then I've been overweight. Blood glucose remains elevated. Although grain-free and eating meat and greens, what am I missing? There's a lot of potential that you're missing, Deborah. you could be reacting to other foods. You could be reacting to meat and greens. It's hard to say. You should get some testing done. You should also make sure you get some testing done to assess your B vitamins and certain minerals like chromium and magnesium and zinc because of their role in blood sugar. They play a major role in how your body is capable of utilizing glucose as energy. You might also consider looking at your total carbohydrate counts, and looking at them. If you're eating more than 35% of your calories coming from carbohydrates, you might be eating wrong for what's going on, and that may be part of your problem too. So I would consider counting. Let's see here. We're going to wrap it up here shortly, but so just started carnivore 4 weeks ago, was diagnosed with Hashimoto's over a year ago, trying to overcome some chronic pain issues, have mainly low back pain. What's the best natural anti-inflammatory? I like four things really for natural anti-inflammation that are very well tolerated by 99% of the people that use them. Vitamin C, 5 grams adult dose a day. Quercetin, 2 to 3 grams a day. Especially when you combine them, they work synergistically together. And then omega-3, especially a good mixture of EPA, DHA. I mentioned earlier Ultra Omega. It's very, very strong, very pure omega-3. And then white willow. We have something called white willow complex, which is a mixture of white willow from the willow bark, but also has boswellia in it. And those two together work to inhibit both something called COX, which is cyclooxygenase, but also LOX, lipooxygenase. Those are the two enzymes in the membrane of your cell that help to drive the inflammatory process. And so those compounds naturally reduce or inhibit those two pathways. And so they can work really, really well for a lot of folks. But even more than just taking pills, why are you inflamed? Why is your back bothering you? Did you injure it? Is it not injured? Do you have a disc herniation? Do you have facet imbrication? I mean, there's so many different things to explore there in terms of that back pain. You don't just want to take pills to mask the pain. And even if they're natural pills, right, and not drugs, they're at least not going to harm you potentially, but they're may not solve why your pain exists. And so you'd really want to understand more in depth about why you're having the low back pain. So it might also be a good idea to go and see a good back doc. Chiropractor is probably the best qualified, in my opinion, to treat low back pain conservatively and to get you a real solid answer as to what might be going on if there's a structural problem. If there's not a structural problem, they can let you know that too, and you can move on to strength training, stretching, possibly doing some rehab, and continuing to investigate diet and lifestyle changes as the main tools. You also might want to invest in the stretching protocols for the muscles in the low back and the quads and the hamstrings and calves, because a lot of times people will develop low back pain because they're desk jobs and they sit all day and their muscles and their legs are atrophied and they're putting too much pressure on the back. And so loosening those things up can be very, very effective for many. I have lupus markers increasing C3C and C4C. I'm gluten-free. I don't know what you mean by PF. You maybe give me a little bit more. Gluten-free. There's so many acronyms. Just stopped all cow dairy after your LRA testing. Any other suggestions to help prevent further progression of disease? Remember with autoimmunity, and this is true for all of you with autoimmunity, there are 4 primary chemical triggers that are behavioral related. The first is you're eating the wrong food. So if you've done LRA testing on gluten-free society, great, you're on the right track. The second trigger, it can be chemical exposures, and there are a variety of different chemicals, but some of the more common chemical exposures we see are mold driving autoimmune disease, mold chemicals, as well as chemicals found in food. So dyes, preservatives, additives, pesticides, that and the like. So making sure you're organic is very important. Number 3 is a pre-existing microbial issue, specifically and especially in the gut. A lot of times with autoimmunity, what we'll see driving the kind of the the continuation of a person's symptomatology will be different kind of microbes living in their gut in an overabundance that don't belong there. And so that may be something you want to get with your doctor and get checked out. And then the fourth would be micronutrient deficiencies. You know, vitamin D deficiency is a perfect example with lupus. We know that vitamin D deficiency, because of its role in immunoregulation, that vitamin D deficiency can lead to an overaggressively reacting immune system. And so, you know, checking your nutrient status and levels becomes very, very important. Okay. Where do you get the genetic tests and what is it called? So if you're talking about gluten sensitivity genetic testing, Lauren, go to Gluten Free Society, and there's a tab at the top of the menu that says laboratory testing. And if you click that button and scroll down, it'll say genetic testing. That's the genetic testing that I've been referring to for gluten predisposition. Curious about coffee for celiacs? Did an entire video on coffee. You might want to go check that out on our channel. It's a mixed bag, right? Possibly it's okay and possibly it's not. Part of that is to get tested to see if you're reacting to coffee, but where most celiacs get in trouble is when they're using like the instant coffees. Instant coffees can be cross-contaminated. They can also, a lot of times, a lot of them contain wheat or wheat flakes for texture. And so that can be problematic as well. Okay, I think we got more questions than I have time to answer. But I'm going to answer one more. So Raven says, how did you figure out you were gluten sensitive? How did I figure it out? That I would myself personally, I'm going to assume that's what you mean. For me, you know, a lot of you maybe have heard my story. I was working in graduate school and going through training in the VA hospital in the rheumatology department. And one of the things that just kept happening repetitively was the doctor I worked for just kept handing out and dispensing meds. I mean, the primary drugs being given out were methotrexate, steroids, and non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, sometimes gold injections, but it just wasn't, you know, the outcomes just weren't all that great. The pain management wasn't all that great. The people continued to struggle and their joints continued to malform. And you know, by the time that the medicines were no longer really super effective, they'd bring the surgeons in and the surgeons would do a consult. And then they go and they take these people that they've been giving steroids and methotrexate to, which those of you who don't know, methotrexate and steroids destroy the gut lining and cause malabsorption and malnutrition. So then you take somebody who's been on these drugs for 10, 15, 20 years and you say, oh, let's do surgery, let's replace your joint. And these people are not capable of healing. Nutritionally, they're shattered. And I never understood that. I mean, with my background in nutrition going into the VA, I never understood why you would malnourish somebody chronically with a medicine known to cause malnutrition and then think they were a good candidate for surgery and then not explain to them the risks and the benefits of going through that surgery. To me, that was like insane. It made no sense and it really pissed me off, to be frank, because I'm a veteran and I think these people deserve better respect and better treatment than that. And so for me, I was going through that in my training, and then I left the hospital really out of anger, because it was just, people weren't getting better. It's like people were driving from all over the region, because the VA hospital was regional. And I never really saw anybody get cured. And it was very, you know, when you're a young doctor, you're like, you know, you're kind of green. You're not really quite sure what to expect. You have the training, but you don't have the experience. But it's really disheartening to see no one get better. And it really sets the despair in. But during that time, I'd found so much evidence and research, including the research that I was instructed to read. So, I mean, I was handed a book on rheumatological disease at the time and told to read the book. And it did. And the book was very clear. There were a number of triggers that we knew of that could trigger autoimmune diseases. But the doctors at the VA hospital that I worked with were not measuring whether or not these patients had those triggers. And it didn't make sense to me. Why would they want me to read the book but then not apply the information in the book that they're asking me to read? And so when I went back and challenged that and questioned that, I was told to be quiet. And then when I went to the medical library and I started garnering more research, and what I first discovered was that there was a homology genetically between rheumatoid arthritis and celiac disease, meaning that a lot of people with celiac disease also had rheumatoid arthritis. And when they went gluten-free, a lot of them had improvements in their rheumatological disease. In other words, their pain levels reduced. So I thought, okay, well, that makes sense. These are both autoimmune diseases. The autoimmune disease trigger, the one well-respected and well-known trigger for autoimmune disease in the medical literature at the time was gluten. So it made sense that if it could cause one form of autoimmunity, why not another form? And so I brought that to the attention of my attending, and he dismissed it. And then I kept garnering and gathering more research, and one of the next areas of research I found was fasting. The fasting could lead to autoimmune pain remission in as little as a couple of days. And with the knowledge about gluten, I was like, well, I mean, if people are fasting or having no pain, and people who are cutting gluten out are having less pain, then it makes sense that maybe it's something that people are eating that are the triggers for their autoimmune conditions. And that I found to be very consistent in the medical literature, and it wasn't my research. It was my research of the research that led me to these conclusions. And so every time I would come back and bring more information to my attending, I was told, not to worry about it. We're not applying it. No need to keep doing this. They just wanted to keep pumping these people full of drugs. So when I left the VA, I was pretty disgruntled and in despair. And one of my first patients in private practice was a young girl at 9 years of age. Her name was Ginger. She had permanent port embedded in her arm because she was in and out of the hospital for pain management so frequently. But the doctors, after basically from the age of 2 to the age of 9, they had medicated this little girl with methotrexate, which is a cancer medicine that destroys the gut lining. And then, when the girl turns 9, the doctors look at this little girl's mom and say, she's got 6 months to live. There's nothing more we can do. You need to go home and get ready for a funeral. And those were the words of the mom to me. She confided into me when she brought this little girl into my office. And so one of the first things that we found in her was she was gluten sensitive. And so we got the gluten out of her diet. Within 6 months, we were able to remove the port. And then within 12 months, she was in remission. Changed my life forever, because it's one thing to read about the research and see that these things work in clinical practice. It's another thing to be in clinical practice and be able to apply this information and see it save somebody's life. And so the question was, how did you figure out you were gluten sensitive? Well, Ginger woke me up to the idea that I might be. There were some minor symptoms that I was having at the time. One of them was a chronic cough, especially at night. Another one was, during my younger years, I did a lot of weight training and bodybuilding, and so I couldn't get my body fat composition to go, based on the training and in the diet I was eating, I couldn't get my body fat composition to get down into the level where I felt comfortable to compete. So I tested myself genetically for gluten sensitivity, and personally I have all 4 markers. And so at that point I started going gluten-free, and what happened to me was the cough completely went away. And my body fat percentage dropped to below 12% in a matter of a few months. And so it was, to me, it was just like, it was a no-brainer. I realized that even though I wasn't sick, I hadn't been sick enough to develop major diseases. And most men with autoimmune disease won't develop them until they're in their 50s. And at the time, of course, I was in my early 30s. But the average woman will develop autoimmune disease in her 30s to 40s. So it hits women faster and harder than it hits men. So in my case, that was also true. It hadn't really hit me as hard as it probably would have had I not known it. So that's how I found out, was just through my experience with patients, my experience going through clinic and being frustrated and just being inquisitive, and also wanting to practice what I preach, because at that time where we were diagnosing a lot of gluten issues, I wanted to know, is it something I needed to do too? And my oldest son, used to have spontaneous nose bleeding. His nose would just bleed for no reason, no trauma. He would just start bleeding. And that symptom completely went away when we changed our diets to gluten-free. And then my youngest son had chronic diarrhea. I mean, he just had a lot of problems in the bowel department. And of course, when we took him gluten-free, that all changed too. So I've got a lot of personal experience with it in that way, and hopefully that answers your question, Raven. Thanks for asking. Okay, we got more questions, but not more time. I'm going to go eat lunch. You guys have a fantastic weekend. Make sure you come back. If you're not subscribed already, hit that like button. Look, if you got content value out of the show, hit like. That helps us, okay? And there's 3 ways you can support me. One is you can hit like, and you can share this video with people you think it might benefit. The other is that you can come to Gluten Free Society and subscribe to our newsletter. By doing that, we'll send you a bunch of free information on a regular basis about diet and lifestyle and autoimmune disease in the gluten-free diet. Or you can support us by purchasing our supplement line, or if you're in the market for gluten sensitivity testing or food allergy or nutritional testing, you certainly can can use our resources in that regard. It's why we put them there, because we realize that so many doctors won't support patients who are asking for these things, and so we took it upon ourselves to make that stuff available. So those are all ways you can support us. We appreciate any way you can support us. And please do. Your support helps us do a better job for you, and it helps us get this information out to more and more people who need it. Remember, our mission is to save 100 million lives, and we thank you very, very dearly from the bottom of our hearts in helping us to reach more people. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Tuesday.